some of these structures, they have a very different meaning throughout their lives, right? They have a different meaning before they're constructed. As it was mentioned, the Eiffel Tower was faced with some opposition for sure. And then once it was constructed, that was for certain reasons. And then fast forward to today, I think for the general consumer, right, we understand the tower to be slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree there. So, so for you guys, Marina, you live there. I don't know if you've lived there as
I
well for
did.
any period of time, David. But for you guys, prior, I guess if you can go back in your memory, prior to visiting, if you have or have not, prior to visiting, did you have initial sort of perception or thoughts about the Eiffel Tower?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm from a small town, probably like an hour north of Paris. So I'm not a Parisian, and I think the Eiffel Tower probably didn't mean as much as native Parisians usually does. So growing up, to me, the Eiffel Tower was kind of the symbol of Paris, and actually the soccer team of Paris, that they use it as their logo, which tells you like how strong of an image the Eiffel Tower is for Paris. So growing up, I didn't really care so much about it, I would say. It didn't mean a whole lot to me, and I would go to Paris once in a while with my parents, and we would see it, but we would never go and visit it because it was always understood as being this thing for tourists or for Parisians, but anyone else that no one really cared. So it actually took me quite a few years. I lived in Paris for 5 years, and believe it or not, I think I went to visit it my last year there when David actually came to visit me. That's probably the only reason why I went. I was like, okay, he's coming to visit me from California. He wants to see it. He wants to, like go on it. I was like, fine, I'll go.
Yeah.
But it took me a while to actually visit it.
But I think this gets to our larger kind of point that the perception that a lot of French who are not from Paris have of Paris, right?
Right.
Like my relationship to Paris as a very average American, Chinese American, we can say, growing up is that Paris is a very romantic place. There's love, there's accordions, and all the cliches you can possibly think of. And so, but those are a lot of ways, there are very positive emotions toward this city of Paris, and then therefore, let's say the Eiffel Tower. But like in your case, Marina, and I think for a fair number of French people who are not in Paris, their perception of that city is not as seductive, right?
Well, and we know Parisians, so if you're not a Parisian, there is this like tension between Parisian and provincial, and that whole kind of split there. But I think my perception of it has changed since I went, because I went with other people. I think I enjoy going there now, and I've actually been there like at least twice or even 3 times. And every time I enjoy it, not so much for the experience of the building itself, but more seeing how the people I go with perceive it, like foreigners and families and friends who've never seen it before.
You're stepping on the next questions.
Oh, sorry.
Come on. Slow down there. I'm just kidding.
And then Marina, your audio is really low. I don't know if it's a proximity to the mic.
Your audio is talking to the mic, Marina?
1 2 1 2.
Just speak louder also.
If you have to watch the TV show Emily in Paris, right? And like why French people don't speak as loud as Americans. It's just a cultural thing.
Okay.
I grew up not speaking loud.
Okay. My relatives are not quiet.
Michelle, did you want to jump in here?
It's interesting that you talk about being an average American, David, and your experience with Paris. I've traveled all over the world. I've been to 7 continents. And I will say that when you go to Paris, you almost have this sense of it would be remiss to not go to the Eiffel Tower, to not climb the Eiffel Tower, to not take 100,000 photos of it and sit in the lawn that sits right in front of it. It's that type of attraction that you kind of, as a non-Parisian and as someone who's not from France, I think your relationship with the structure is that one of the reasons why you would go to Paris, aside from an experience, but one of the reasons you would go is to actually experience the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% correct. And there's something about big landmarks and monuments and icons of cities that, it's almost, so for me, the first time I visited Paris, I wasn't even so conscious that I could say that I thought I need to experience the tower. It was more like I just need to see it and be fairly close to it, because then that means I've arrived in Paris, right? If I don't see it and I'm not fairly close to it, then somehow I've missed Paris, which is kind of an absurd thing to think, although you can see the tower everywhere in Paris. So and there's a whole other dimension to the Eiffel Tower and kind of observatory towers and decks in terms of an experience point. So, but for me, the perception beforehand was very much like how we just discussed. And it was literally, I just need to see it, right? Because somehow that means something.
Then you could go back.
Yeah.
Because I would also, I would say that that's not unique to the Eiffel Tower, though, right? Like
No.
There are places all over the world that, yeah, you're right. You maybe don't need to actually physically climb the tower, but if you don't see it, and if you don't take a snapshot in front of it, and if you don't photograph it from every single angle, then you sort of feel like, well, was I even in Paris? But I think there's cities all across the world that have iconic structures, like the Space Needle, or like the Statue of Liberty, or the Big Ben in London. There's these structures that you feel like, have you really even been or experienced the city without having seen and witnessed that iconic structure?
It's funny you guys say that, because we recently went, well, not recently now, but it's probably been almost 2 years. We went to Seattle, and we did see the Space Needle, but another spot that I wanted to see was the library. Can't remember the exact name of it, but the new library there. And it was literally across the street, but we got our time mixed up somehow, and didn't, because we arrived in Seattle, I think, on the weekend, and it was closed one of those days or something, and the day that I planned to go there, it was closed. So ended up not being able to go inside. Even though I saw it from the outside, I really wanted to walk the interior, and because we didn't get to do that, I feel like my Seattle trip is not really a full Seattle trip in my mind. So I have this empty feeling of now I got to go back, because if I would have gone and been able to walk it, I probably wouldn't necessarily go back to Seattle anytime soon. But now I feel like I have to go back sometime soon.
Are you talking about the Olme project?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. As an architect, I feel you on that. If I had gotten there and seen the outside but not been inside, I would have to say I'd have to go back.
But that's the thing, right? Like when you go and travel places, you feel like you have to see those monuments, because you don't know when you're going to be back there next, right?
Yeah.
Is that going to be your only time there, or are you going to come back? You don't know. If you're a local, like my plan was never to go to the Eiffel Tower before I moved to New York City, because I was like, you know what? It's always going to be there. Like anytime I go back home, I could go and see it. I'm going to go back to France at some point.
Right.
So the feeling of missing it or having to do and to visit it right away is very different.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's true. And, there's, I don't know, let's see, within the architecture and design community, some of the more hardcore architects, it's almost frowned upon, if you visit some of these touristy icons, and it's frowned upon if you go up to the top of it and partake in the tourist attractions. And there's some truth to that, only in the sense that if you limit your vision to Paris to just the Eiffel Tower, or you put too much pressure on a single object, then yeah, of course that's the case. But, as Marina said, also for a lot of people, traveling is expensive, and it's just logical. Like, of course you're going to see the Eiffel Tower. You're going to go to Paris and not see, you might not return to Paris. And there's an experiential kind of value to these towers and places as well, right? Giving you a new perspective of the city and things like this.
So that's a good point. So great transition point. So when you guys did visit, and it's funny that, Marina, it was your first time was when David joined you.
It's so embarrassing.
Can you guys sort of walk us through what that trip was like, and sort of any emotional or if it was devoid of emotion when you did go, what was that experience like, sort of walking through or walking up the tower, or however you experienced it?
So it happened back in, I think it was like 2010, and we went in September, which actually was a great time to go visit the tower because most of the tourists are back home and no one is there. So it was really nice. We ended up going by the end of the day to kind of get the city lights at night to make it even more magical. So it was some sort of, like tourist bucket list for David, but also like a romantic evening on the Eiffel Tower.
No. You're sorry. This is an inaccurate description of what would happen.
Yeah.
I had already been to the tower. I had been to the top of the tower before that. We were going because you had never gone. So don't make it seem like you had to do this because of me.
You didn't need to say that. Gosh.
Anyway,
but we actually didn't make it to the top because we only make it to the first level.
Yeah.
We had a terrorist attack alert, so they ask everyone to evacuate. So we basically just made it to the first level. We're there for a few minutes, and then we had to take the stairs down to evacuate. So it was kind of a big fail, to be honest.
What year was this?
It was 2010. Right?
I don't
2010,
remember.
okay.
Yeah, 2010.
Yeah. Nothing happened.
It was, I think everyone was kind of on edge with monuments at that time, even if it has been a few years since, most of the attacks. But there is no joke. As soon as there is like the smallest alert there, like they just evacuate everybody.
Apparently it's pretty common.
It's very common.
Afterwards.
And we didn't get a refund, so it was, like 20 euros or whatever
really?
It was.
Wow.
Yeah. French style.
I didn't know that.
yeah. No, I was not happy about it. So that was the first time.
So that completely dampened your trip. Did you go back and sort of relive an experience that was a little more positive?
Yeah, we actually went back there with both of our parents a few years later. And I think it might have been for my parents the first time they were up in the Eiffel Tower to tell you that, they're in their mid-60s and it was their first time. And David's parents was their first time too. So it was kind of a big day for everybody. It actually was a success. We made it to the top. We even put a little chain lock up there with our names on it for everyone. So it was a pretty memorable adventure.
I don't know if people know this, but it's a thing that happens maybe in other cities too. But
Parisians, they just put locks on everything.
Yeah, there's this thing where you place locks across, was it Pont Neuf? And on one of the bridges?
Not Pont Neuf, the Pont des Arts, the art bridge.
Right. And then there's locks at the top of the Eiffel Tower too. And my mom was so intent on doing this, and the tower is like how many feet tall? 1,300 feet or something. It's really freaking tall. And I just thought, and it's fairly open at the top. And I thought, you're going to drop this thing. It's going to rocket down to the bottom at like 60 miles an hour and impale someone. And so I was so nervous. I couldn't watch her do it. I'm like, I'm not watching you do it. They're fumbling around. This is going to be a disaster. We're going to get arrested.
Whipping past you.
I know.
I don't remember the locks being there when I was at the Eiffel Tower in 2005. Is that? I know that locks on bridges in Paris is very common. I don't remember on the Eiffel Tower. Has that been going on for a long time?
I don't believe so. But they had to take the locks off of that famous bridge in the center of Paris because it was actually putting too much weight on the bridge.
No, it's nonsense.
Well,
maybe
that's what
too
they
much.
said.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe, because people couldn't put any new ones and they decided to,
maybe
do a clean slate. So they took them off. They took them off the bridge, and I think that's probably from that point that people just started putting them on other bridges and even the Eiffel Tower. They're like, fine, you know what? We'll just find another spot to do it.
So I just did a quick search of the height of the Eiffel Tower. 984 feet, 1,063 to the tip.
Mm-hmm.
So I know none of us are physicists, but yes. The velocity of that lock hitting the concrete below would be pretty bad.
I think you would seriously damage someone for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see, because I think those places, like most of those places, like the Gum Alley in Seattle, where those locks are, usually when they fill up, they have to cut down or scrape everything and sort of refreshen it. So maybe that was the case if they do continue to do it, or people got upset that they took off the locks on the bridge and they moved them up to the tower one way or another. But Michelle, did you want to talk a little bit about your experience with your visit?
Yeah, I mean, it was so long ago, to be honest. It was 2005. I was studying abroad in Copenhagen, Denmark, my junior year of college, and it was a spring semester, and I actually traveled to Paris for a week's time with some other students that were studying abroad who actually were from Canada. So the two of us went to Paris, stayed there for the week. And it was, as I kind of said before, it was one of those monuments that you sort of just felt like you needed to check the box.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember taking photos of it from every angle throughout the city where I could see it. And for some reason, it was like one of those places where you just can't help yourself but to snap photographs of it. And bear in mind, this was, in the time before cell phones, when you had an old-fashioned camera with, at that time, it was the micro, what do they call those? The micro USB. I can't remember what the disc is that goes inside of a camera, but it wasn't like how the social media craze where you take these photos and post it. But my point being, it was an old-fashioned camera, and yet I, for some reason, couldn't help but photograph it from every angle. And in terms of my experience, what's odd is I don't actually remember the climb up very well. I remember being at the top, but only sort of. And so that, when I reflect on it today, 15 and a half years later, it's interesting to me because you would think, for something as iconic as it is, you would think that it would stand out to me more. But it doesn't. I don't remember that day in arriving in so much anticipation. I remember it more so as like a thing that I'm supposed to do because I'm in Paris.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but what I should have done prior to this recording is actually pulled up the photos that I took in 2005 on my old-fashioned digital camera, to just refresh my memory of what that experience was like for me. Because sitting here 15 and a half years later, it doesn't stand out as some, monumental experience that I've had in my travels and in my life. But I do know that while I was there, as I said earlier, I couldn't stop photographing it. Every single time I saw it, and then it would light up, and I don't remember what the cadence is of when it lights up and sparkles, but you'd sort of like you'd wait for that in anticipation, and then as soon as it would happen, you'd start snapping the photos again, and you're like, oh my god, I've already taken 400 photos of this, but yet somehow I'm drawn to it again.
Like a moth to a flame.
But I think that's like it's partially because of the, like we were talking about, the pressure we put on the tower as a tourist or as a non French person, but also it has to do with the tower itself, right? It's the fact that it might still be the tallest structure in France, or certainly in Paris, and there's nothing really around it that matches its height. Its form is iconic, and you can pretty much see it from everywhere in Paris, and and in a lot of cases it takes, in fact, effort to not see the tower. So it becomes this kind of game. What?
Yeah, well, yeah, it depends where you are.
Yeah, sure. But it becomes this kind of game of this object that you constantly have a relationship to, and buildings are always framing it. So it's a very photogenic piece in that sense, right? If you're catching glimpses of it between buildings as you're on the subway or the metro, or you're walking down the street, it's always being framed up for you in some way.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
The ascension to up to the tower is actually, I do remember it, and I think it was pretty fascinating because from point where you get at the entry where you buy your ticket to pretty much where you get off the elevator and see the view, it's like a one continuous shot, because everything is open. There is no interruptions. There is no walls. There is no elevators that are enclosed. So you feel like you're really traveling from the ground up continuously. And the fact that the elevators are going at an angle was really fun and exciting to me, because I was like, whoa, it's the first time I get in an elevator that goes in that direction, and you can get really up close to the structure by being in it. So I do remember that moment very, very strongly. And also when we stood underneath the tower, right in the center, and you look up, I remember I was like, whoa, like you get the scale of this structure. And the day we went to the second time, I think it wasn't very, very busy. So the ground floor was pretty much emptied of people. So you just see those four legs kind of standing on the ground, and you feel absolutely minuscule. You feel really, really tiny. When you're at the top, you actually kind of lose the sense of scale, because everything is so far and removed from you that you don't really know those tiny buildings that you see, like what size they are and at what height you are up in the sky. So I would say to anyone who goes to see the tower, really pay attention to kind of that procession from when you approach the tower to when you go up, because that's kind of where your body gets challenged with scale and perceptions of things.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So for me, I haven't been. So I have this whole disconnect right now in experience, and I think right now I'm sort of on that, task list sort of mindset of visiting it. And it's more so, I don't know that I've talked about this or not on our podcast, but so my grandfather was part of a big old rock group, and they have this sort of iconic photo in our family where I think it was for an album cover or something of part of their world tour. And they have a photo of their group sitting, I'm not quite sure where it is exactly, but it's somewhere within a square near the Eiffel Tower. And there's like some steps that come down. So their whole group's sitting on those steps, and you can see the Eiffel Tower in the back. And I think my dad and his sister have both made it to Paris and recreated that photo sitting near or exactly where my grandfather was. So now it's like on my bucket list. That's one part of it. It was why I need to go there, just for that connection, that lineage and sort of connection to recreate that photo for sure.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's pretty cool.
So outside of your experience, after you hit the ground, did you guys, were you mindful of maybe how your perception changed for all three of you? Did you think of it differently? Did it add something to you as far as like how you look at these types of structures?
I think I felt differently, when I said like, oh, to me the Eiffel Tower was this Parisian symbol, right? Well, after I went with people who are not Parisian, and I was like, well, you know what? I enjoyed it and I understand it differently. And I went up, and I think I think about it and I see it now more as almost like a lighthouse in Paris. Like it makes me feel safe to kind of walk around the city and know that it's there, it's gonna sparkle at night, people are going up and down. It's been there for years, and it's probably gonna be there maybe forever. So it became kind of this very reassuring symbol to me after that.
That's interesting. Sort of like the the canary in the coal mine, sort of.
Right.
There's just like this comfort level of a constant.
Yeah, something that will be there. Like it doesn't really matter what architects start building in Paris. Like the Eiffel Tower is there, we're good.
David?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would agree with Marina's like point about the procession, and I think that has to do with the specific form of the tower itself. Like I've been to the top of that Eiffel Tower twice. I've been to the Pearl Tower. which I believe actually might be on your guys' logo, if I'm not mistaken. And I've been to the top of the Empire State Building and the World Trade Center, Freedom Tower. So like going to the top of the tower is just kind of something I enjoy doing, and in part because it gives you a new view, a visual view, but also conceptual understanding of cities. And but the Eiffel Tower is different in a lot of senses because it's an open structure. So there's this continuity that you get from the ground level, the base level, all the way up. And because the oblique elevator that you're in is has a lot of windows, you're never disconnected, right? On the extreme, like the Freedom Tower, let's say, or the Empire State Building, you are entering a building, right? That building has a function to it. You get into an elevator, and in the case of the Empire State Building, the elevator is just an elevator. And so there's a kind of this detachment that you have from the structure itself, and there's a detachment in the procession from the ground to the eventual top. Whereas in the Eiffel Tower, it's much more continuous, and the engagement is kind of maintained throughout that process because as you're moving through the structure itself is framing the city back for you, right? And of course, then you get to the top, and there's like champagne and stuff. So for me, when I got to the top the first time, the thing I was most struck by was obviously the view of the city and what it offers. Not just as selfies weren't really a thing then, I suppose, but not just as a selfie moment or a moment to take photographs with your family, but as a way to kind of reconstruct mentally the city that you're looking at. Because obviously you experience the city on your feet, you're used to seeing buildings, and you're mapping the city in your mind a certain way, right? And you get to the tower, and now you're looking at the actual physical real city, not from a map, not from Google Earth, but with your own eyes, and Paris is fairly flat. And there it all is in a 360-degree view. And that's a very peculiar and very different way to see a city and I think understand it. And that was something that really, really struck me. And that's also why I think since that first visit, I always make a point to go to the toppest tower, the toppest point of any city, because there's another dimension that it offers.
Yeah.
David, we would travel well together. I'm the same way. I mean, if there's an opportunity to go up in height and look over a city, I will take that opportunity. I think the interesting thing to just add on to what you were saying about the Eiffel Tower is, you know, unlike some of the other structures where you would go to some level to oversee and overlook a city and its surroundings, the Eiffel Tower, you don't even have to get in the elevator. You could just climb the stairs. That is an option, and that's not an option in a lot of these monuments that take you to great heights. So, you know, with the Eiffel Tower, it's like you could literally just climb the steps. I don't know how many steps it is, but it's a lot. And in fact, I actually think, if I remember correctly, in 2005, because I was a student studying abroad, I didn't have very much money at that time. And I actually think that I did climb the steps to save money from having to take the elevator.
Wow. That's a lot. That's a long climb.
Yeah, it's a long climb.
I think it is a long climb, but hey, when you have no money, you want to rise to great heights.
100%. I know we're not talking about China, of course, but the first time I visited China, we went to the Great Wall. Similar, right? You have to see the Great Wall, and there's different ways you can get onto the wall. There's different points, and we went during the summer of 2008. Incredibly hot and humid. I've never experienced such hotness and humidity at once. And we did not know that, like, you know, half an hour drive down on the wall, there's a point to get on, which has a gondola. We didn't know that. So we took the route that was something like 2,400 steps or something insane. But,
Oh my God.
you know, it's an experience that's worthwhile, I suppose, and it makes the reward at the top that much sweeter and sweatier. It's super sweaty.
They should have showers side of all of these.
And it's been so long, and now I'm trying to remember, can you even actually get to the very top just from stairs? I don't know if they allow that or not, but here nor there, I know that my point was that you're sort of, you know, you're out to the element. You're not going into a building and getting into an enclosed elevator and rising to great heights. It's a very different experience.
For
Yeah.
some reason, I recall that they may have shut down the stairs for the entire climb, and you can only get to like, I don't know what level it
The
is, but
second floor, yeah, that's about
yeah.
100 or 120 meters, I believe, above ground level.
Yeah, so I think at least for now, and I'm not sure if it's like a terrorist threat thing or a pandemic thing, but I recall hearing something recently that for the stairs you can only get, at least sometime recently can only get to that second level. But so do you have a perception of how generations have evolved their thinking and um, enjoyment of these types of landmarks?
That is a really interesting question, and we were talking about this last night. There's so many ways to tackle this. I'd say, first of all, with the Eiffel Tower, going back to the fact that it's very different from many other structures because it's not programmatic. I mean, there's like a restaurant and they have a tourist shop at the top, but it's not, like I said, it's not a building. It's not the Freedom Tower. It's not the Empire State Building. It doesn't have a function to it. And that was also why when it was proposed by its designer, it was met with confrontation because it was like, why are we going to build this giant useless thing? And at the time, right, it was the tallest structure in the world. So you have to really imagine that that's pretty mind-blowing to create a structure of that size for a fair, essentially, right, and have it not really have any purpose. At the same time, speaking as a totally not French expert, I would say that's quintessentially French to do something like that.
Oh, is it?
But so the fact that the tower doesn't have a more utilitarian or pragmatic purpose is what gives it its, I think, power, right? Because there's something about it being this literal open framework structure that's void of any more specific meaning. It allows, I think, all of us to kind of project a certain kind of imagination and emotion toward this thing, right? I can't have the same emotion as I do with the Eiffel Tower as I can't have the same emotion toward like the Freedom Tower, right? Because it's lined with offices, also 9/11 and stuff. But or the Pearl Tower, for example, like it has a different sensation because of its physical presence, but also because of the lack of purpose that the Eiffel Tower has.
And it's very hard to actually classify it in a way, right? Like, is it a monument? Is it a landmark? Is it an art piece?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a building per se. It's not enclosed. It's not programmed really, but it has this kind of symbolism and meaning to people. So it's kind of an anomaly in a way, I feel, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of. I mean, I'm not a historian, but I can't think of any other objects or towers that I know of that have the same qualities that we just described. But to your question about generations, I think that's where, I think I might have said earlier, that's where it's interesting to see like how a structure has a certain meaning before it gets built, then when it's built, and then, the first 10 years of its life, and then fasting forward to now, right, with the Eiffel Tower. But that lack of inherent meaning, I think is important for the Eiffel Tower, and that's what makes it special. So I don't know. I think the Eiffel Tower is able to evolve and kind of absorb whatever meaning we give it over time better than other towers because of that. Does that make sense, kind of what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great point because we talked about the Space Needle, how it just recently underwent its 100-year anniversary and did a massive renovation on it, and that brought it basically up to date because of the advancements in technology, some things that they were able to do, because over its evolution there was concern of people jumping off of the top of the Space Needle. So then over time it became this like cage on the top. But since advancements in technology, they were able to change that to more glass on the outside and on the inside of the observation deck. So it's much more open and has the original feeling to it while providing safety. So that's interesting that you point out, the possibility to evolve. But the Eiffel Tower doesn't need that. Like what it is what it is, but it can change with people's understanding of it and connection to it, without it changing itself.
Yeah, and there's a really wonderful article. I think it's an excerpt from a book actually by he's a philosopher, right? Roland Barthes. Well, how do you say it in French?
Roland Barthes.
Okay, there we go. By him. And he talks about this, and he also kind of says that the tower is more of a crystallizer rather than a true object. And I think that's a really interesting observation to make. That again, this has to do with the openness and the lack of I don't want to say lack of meaning, but lack of specific historical reference, or it's not trying to mark a date or mark an event necessarily. So I think that's interesting. I think that the fact that the tower acts more of a bridge kind of between oneself and the city of Paris or the people of Paris is something that I think might be unique to structures that are open and blank or nude or empty. And in particular with the Eiffel Tower, because it is just structure. There's no layers of structure and then insulation and then cladding and yada, 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 yada. It's just pure structure. And there's something quite beautiful and engaging about that.
Now, going back to the generation, like one of the thoughts that I've had is with the transition into more technology focused generation that millennials and Z are, I think there's been sort of what Michelle referenced earlier is this change in how we relate to spaces, and things become like a checkbox of I need to, if you weren't there, if you didn't get a photo, if it's not on Instagram, did it exist? So there's sort of this checklist mentality of I got to get there, I have to take the photo, and then I'm done. But there's not like a real appreciation and mental connection to spaces or these landmarks. In my mind, that's kind of how I see it. Any thoughts on that front?
I think you're spot on that. I even noticed that with myself. And again, I'm very well traveled. I've been to a lot of places, and I find myself now in this Instagram era of being more focused on getting the shot than just sort of savoring the experience. And I don't think it was like that back then. I mean, I did talk about how when I was in Paris and all I was doing was using my little digital camera and shooting photos. But yeah, I do think there's some truth to that.
David, Marina.
We're pointing at each other to see. You go. Yeah, I know. I agree with both of you. I think for me, I think the question is how engaged we are with the cities that we're in, and engaged with the built environment. And of course, I'm a bit biased because I'm an architect and urban designer, but I think there's something profoundly meaningful to having a higher level of engagement. And I think one of the highest forms in that case is when you're navigating through a city. So there are different ways to navigate. I think on the extremes, there are using landmarks. I say a giant, usually very tall kind of object in the distance, and you're just looking at that in the periphery to kind of guide roughly where you are. So if I'm in New York City, I look at the 57 Leonard, the tower by Herzog and de Meuron, and so I'm forgetting all my things.
Yeah,
Tribeca, so whatever. That's like the tallest tower in that area because they bought all the air rights and whatever. If I know I need to head that direction, I use the sun or I look at that tower and it kind of guides me as to where I'm going. That's one way of getting through the city. On the other end of the spectrum, you have kind of going block by block, which is you look at one street sign, you read the graphic, you read the text, right? And it tells you in a less spatial way that you are at this point, and you navigate in that sense. I tend to believe that navigating through the landmark way is a little more rewarding. I'd prefer to see people kind of have a general sense of direction, feel free to get lost or meander until they get to where they need to go, right? And this gets back also to, I think, what you two were saying about the prescriptive nature in which we experience cities or navigate. And I tend to believe that that's not a good thing when we over-prescribe our destinations and ultimately the life and the way we live. And so that's why I think that using just physical things kind of in the distance can be quite powerful.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. It's such a beautiful way to put it, in that, you sort of find you embark on this journey and you have no idea what you're gonna stumble across on the way, but sort of your frame of reference of whatever that object, that landmark is in the distance. And back to what you said, Marina, it's part of the canary in the coal mine. You have that comfort level of, I got to get somewhere in that area, or I know where I'm trying to get to in relation to that. So I'm okay, but I can just go on this journey and see what comes up. I have no idea exactly what I'm going to encounter, but I know I'm safe. I just know where I got to get to, and I'm just going to enjoy what I come across on the way.
The first time that I was in France, it was a study abroad situation, is in the case for many people. And there's a small group of us, and we'd go around and kind of visit Paris and other places. And in our group, we're all from different parts of the country and the United States, and one of us was from Korea. And the guy who kind of led the group was this pretty brash individual from Boston. Love him to death. And he had this thing where he would just kind of just go. And his rule was when you have to come back, to your dorm or whatever it is, you never take the same route. And that's incredibly risky, because if you don't, like, now you have an iPhone, right? And presumably most people. So if you get lost, you can always kind of, you're safe in a certain sense. You have a safety net. But at that time, we didn't have iPhones. No one had iPhones. So there's a few cases where we got back on the trail, like, just by luck. And it could have ended really terribly. But there's something very powerful to that, right? And I've always remembered that mindset that he had, and I try often to employ it. But I think it is difficult now because of Google Earth, Google Maps, Apple Maps, and Instagram, and the need to fill that social media void. It's difficult, right? Because it's much easier for us to say that based on all those tools and Yelp, that I can plot out half a dozen places to visit of this new city, hit them in one day, and as you were saying, I've checked all the boxes, I've seen the stuff, and I know with a high degree of certainty that it's going to be a wonderful experience. And that's true, but man, there's a lot that you're missing out on if you operate only that way. So I'm not saying that you have to avoid all those tools, but they are just tools, and I think you have to leave some room for improvisation.
But that's true. That's true.
And your head is literally down.
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
at
yeah.
the phone.
and actually, we noticed that on several of our trips, we always pack a DSLR or two with us, because you got to document the trips. You don't know, we went to Japan a couple years ago. We're like, we got to take a bunch of photos. We don't know when we're going to go back next. And some days we're like, I don't even want to take photos. I want to be in the moment. I want to pay attention to where I'm walking, to the people that live here, to, the smallest details that are not Instagrammable. No one really cares, but that I've never seen before, but here. And I think it's important to sometimes, just switch off the phone, or like go back to the pocket camera and take, take some old school shot where you actually meant to take that picture and you took it for yourself and not for the gram,
For the gram, yeah.
Yeah.
That way of travel is a little risky, though. And I don't want to move too far off topic, but, you can end up with a day that doesn't feel rewarding when you set out. You have a limited amount of time to visit and tour a city. You set out to see certain things, obviously, whether they're museums or monuments or certain restaurants that you want to hit. We did this in London when we were there in February, where we did just set aside a day that we really didn't have a plan. We kind of just set out to take the boat and take it as far as it would take us and get out and walk around and see where that would, we just literally, and it was really, really magical because we were just aimlessly wandering, and there was something unique and interesting about that. But you can equally be, I think, disappointed when you do that, because you might feel like, hey, you've wasted a day. And actually, in our case, what happened is because the following day we didn't plan well enough. So we actually did miss something, a monument that we really had wanted to see. but because we had spent the previous day sort of just being, wanderlusting, we ended up missing something. But I do think that it's important, when we can give ourselves enough time to experience and sort of live and breathe in a city as a tourist. I do think there's some value to setting aside that opportunity to just, take the different route or experience the city as someone might who lives there, as opposed to that tourist that's just going to all the same tourist attractions that every other tourist throughout the entire world is going to as well.
And that's one of my criticism, I think, of landmarks, is that they become oftentimes kind of this travel marketing stamp,
Sure.
that we sell on brochures and we make people want to absolutely go and see. But there is more to France than the Eiffel Tower, and I hope that a lot of people who go there are not just going for the tower. You must see it if you go there, but there's so much more than that, right? That are not landmarks, like small, teeny, tiny buildings in small parts of France that are probably as interesting as the Eiffel Tower.
And I think thanks to a lot of travel shows these days, I think that dimension of cities is something that people are much more interested in and much more cognizant of. And certainly Airbnb has made it into their kind of marketing line, right? I think also there's something about just the mental space that you're in. I think maybe that's another part of it that's important. So even if you're going to see a tourist attraction, there's a certain kind of zone that you can allow yourself to occupy, again, mentally, that allows you to enjoy the experience. So instead of being obsessed with the destination, it's a switch in understanding where you say, well, the experience itself is the destination, right, or the experience itself, that is the thing I'm after. So like when I was traveling with the group of friends that I've mentioned, it's like you said, Michelle, we had times where things did not go right and it was a wasted day on paper. But in terms of the experience, right, and because we were friends, it was totally not wasted. But I mean,
you probably remember that almost more.
100%. Like, we did we make it to the Louvre? I don't remember, but maybe we missed it. So we slept on the grass in front of the Louvre, like overnight, and we got kicked off the lawn, and we slept in McDonald's, got kicked out of there. And those are things I remember more than like the Louvre itself.
That's what happens when you don't plan.
Things only a student would do.
Yeah,
right?
that's the other aspect too. Let's be honest. Like, if you're traveling with the kids and your grandmother or whatever, there's like certain things that maybe won't happen.
Yeah.
But then there's other places in the world where you can just aimlessly wander and you're almost guaranteed to have a magical experience. And the places that come to mind for me that are like that are Rome,
Mm-hmm.
Or Capri, which is an island just off of Italy. Rome is a place where you can sort of just set out aimlessly in the day and be guaranteed to, be overcome with how unique and cool the alleys are, or the cobblestone streets, and then all the while still stumble upon the Spanish Steps or the Colosseum or, any one of the other famous monuments there. And maybe part of that is because it's a pretty compact city. So
Mm-hmm.
it's fairly easy to just sort of wander and you're going to hit these monuments. But I think there's some magic in the experience of just what's around the corner here, or where does this alley lead to, or, wow, look at this little wine bar that's shoved in this little nook between two buildings. I think that's a city where when we were traveling there, we had no problem just saying, hey, look, we've got 4 days to just explore with really no set agenda.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, on the question of landmarks and generations and what they mean for people, I think I had written down this question and I don't really know where it leads to, but I was wondering if you can actually create an authentic landmark today, because most landmarks and monuments, which are not necessarily the same things, they were created to kind of mark a historical event of some kind, or to be in celebration of an emperor, some kind of ruler that probably had a lot of poor people building the thing for them. Yeah. And so a lot of monuments and landmarks rely on a lot of symbolic gestures to give them meaning. And of course, that meaning wears off over time. Sometimes it doesn't. but I don't know if you could construct such a monument today, because I feel like, generally speaking, the door to meaning has been kind of like blasted open. So we live in a much more heterogeneous society, a heterogeneous understanding of design and architecture, and that's also where I think the Eiffel Tower has aged incredibly well and will continue to do so. And I'm skeptical of new structures that don't employ maybe the same level or close to it, same level of nakedness to its architectural identity. Does that make sense what I'm saying, kind of? Right?
Yeah, it's fascinating because if you think about landmarks around the world, a lot of them were tied to the World's Fair, and we don't have that anymore. And we're a very capitalistic society across the world now. So everything that's created has to be utilitarian and has some purpose of day-to-day purpose. So, I don't know that we can get, I struggle to see the route that we could get back to that, unless someone, ponied up the cash to create this World's Fair type of environment again.
You know what landmark comes to mind for me that was built recently and arguably is not very authentic, but would be an interesting landmark to follow to see if in 50 years or 100 years it is at the Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon West to be specific. And I think it's called Skywalk if I remember, but the structure that extends from the side of the cliff and goes out, 70 meters in a loop. And I actually was there 2 months ago and actually 6 weeks ago. And I have to say, when I was there, it didn't feel like it felt to go to the Eiffel Tower or to go to the Statue of Liberty or, the Sears Tower. It felt different. It felt a little more forced. But when you think about that structure, I think in many ways it is an engineering feat. It's been created not out of some event or World's Fair situation. It was done because my understanding is some Chinese investor, thought that, hey, this is something we ought to do.
But isn't that sort of selling an experience?
Exactly. It's selling an experience. But so that's where I'm saying, like, right now, it doesn't feel authentic and it feels like it was done who knows why. But in 50 years or 100 years, will people look back at that and say, look, wow, this billionaire investor who sort of had this vision, and the Hualapai tribe who said, yes, let's do this, in 50 years or 100 years, will they be as famous? Well, famous maybe isn't the right word, but will they be as known or revered as someone like Mr. Eiffel when he created the Eiffel Tower? I guess, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think for this particular example, it's a little tricky because I would tend to think that the actual landmark or monument is the Grand Canyon, right? And this sky bridge is kind of a platform for us to experience it in a different way. And I think that's probably why we feel like it's not that authentic. It's because the authenticity is all around it. It's not it. Right. But to your point, like I was wondering yesterday, in New York, they are like building those high rises that try to touch clouds. Right. And they are like pushing the limits to how high you can build. And that reminded me, the Eiffel Tower was built and it was the highest structure at some point and we made it a landmark. Would we make those towers in New York by Central Park landmarks too, because they kind of push the limits and the knowledge and the engineering? Or are we kind of past that now because we know we have the ability to do such construction? Like, what is now the criteria to make landmarks today? Is it technology? Is it aesthetics? Is it events in history? Is it culture? What is it?
Oh, God.
Right?
That's a big question.
But I think that goes back to the question of generation and the meaning of landmark at the time they are classified as so, right? And then it also makes me wonder, should we be questioning landmarks? Should we be questioning their status? Is our landmarks supposed to be forever? Or are landmarks maybe just for 50 years and then after that it doesn't make sense? Or it's maybe another building's turn to be a landmark. Like what is...
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's so interesting about that question? I love this question, and I love the direction we're kind of going with this podcast. When you, as you were talking about that, what I kept thinking about, Dimitrius, was the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta that we did a podcast on, and how today that just kind of seems like a really amazing engineering sort of feat, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a landmark, right? Like you don't feel like, oh, that's like a landmark. But then I compare that to something like Wrigley Field in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe you guys disagree, but I kind of feel like Wrigley Field is like a landmark. Like when you go to Chicago, it's kind of one of those things that you sort of want to see. You either want to go to a baseball game, and if not go to the baseball game, you kind of want to stand outside the iconic sign and say, hey, I was here at the stadium and I peered through the chain link fence in the outfield and I kind of saw that. Yeah. But like, what is so special about Wrigley Field? It's just
time. I think that's time.
Yeah. Right. So the question then becomes, take like the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So it doesn't necessarily feel like a landmark today, but will it in 50 years or 100 years?
Right.
I think time is a factor. I think also, and this is a larger kind of question, is that we're living less in a monoculture, right? And again, a lot of the monuments of the past, they were representation and an encapsulation of that monoculture, or there's a very strong identity to a particular city in its relationship to a sports team or whatever, and that becomes like epitomized by this formal thing, the stadium or the tower or whatever. But maybe it's the circles that we're within, but I kind of feel like, we have the election, which is kind of proving my point wrong. But I kind of feel like maybe that monocultural mindset is maybe disappearing and dissipating a little bit. And so that's where I wonder if you can have a monumental landmark structure that one that uses symbolism, especially, does that even make sense anymore? And I don't really know if it does. I think there are performative ways to critique a landmark if you were to create one, and certainly the experience of the people visiting it and the views that it creates for the city and et cetera. That's probably a good base to start with, right? And then maybe the other stuff for me is secondary in a sense.
Yeah. So I think we've pretty much put the pressure on the audience
let us know what you think.
to look at or to consider, what does a landmark even mean today? Which is why I think it's a fascinating series for us to continue to question and examine and try and figure out, what does a landmark mean? What is the value of it? What do we get out of it? What can we get out of it as we continue? How do you recreate it to your guys' questions? And I think it's just a fascinating subject to continue to examine and look at from different perspectives and different monuments that are out there now. So for us,
and just to tack onto that, the monetization factor too, right? So why are you making a landmark? Either you have a lot of pride and you want your name to be known in history, or there's some way to monetize it.
Yeah.
I think the latter is pretty rare.
Yeah. And that's where, like Dimitrius, you were saying, the World's Fairs, right? That's, if we can get back to that mindset for some of these things, I think it'd be really fantastic, because there's an understanding of the object just being beautiful, the object and its relationship to the people, its immediate people around it, right, in the city. And that's kind of that's the priority above anything else, above the person who designed it, above the money it makes, above, I don't know, trying to, again, crystallize whatever event that happened. And that's where, like we were talking briefly about stadiums, like the Olympic Park in Beijing, China, is interesting. You could say a lot of those structures should be landmarks or they are monumental, certainly, but are they a success now that the stadiums are not used? Probably not, right? There are dead spaces. Whereas other ones like the Freedom Tower is used. The Eiffel Tower has 4 feet. It's open underneath. You can move around it. So I think these are the questions that we have to consider as designers, perhaps more than, slapping a face on the side of a building and calling it a day.
So I think Jeff Bezos can step in here. He has all the capital in the world to reignite the World's Fair. Because I think you're right. Like the Olympics, there's articles that talk about how dead those are once the Olympics are over and how abandoned. But if somebody like Bezos gets behind a World's Fair and continues to create and continues to make it a place, maybe that's possible.
Come on, Jeff Bezos, give us a call.
Maybe all the Amazon factories or distribution centers, not factories, but distribution centers will be landmarks.
Yeah.
Give us some time.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. If you like this show, then do us a favor and leave us a review in the iTunes app. Also, if you like the show, then head over to the Spaces Podcast people. Check them out. They have some good stuff. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Feel free to leave comments. Not all of our episodes are on YouTube, so if you want to get all of the content, then really the audio.
Best to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or even Spotify. I think you can subscribe.
Yep.
We're also available on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We, post updates and episode release and all kinds of fun stuff out there. You can also message us directly if you want, or shoot us a text message or leave us a voicemail on the hotline, because we do have a hotline. It is 213-222-6950. If you have any feedbacks, any questions, any guest suggestions, anything you want to share with us directly, feel free to reach out.
And thanks again to Michelle and Dimitrius over at the Spaces Podcast. Good times with them, and we hope we can do a collab in the future. In the meantime, we will talk to you again next week. Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.